You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Termina هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, 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 golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And welcome back to Soccer Today. Duane Rollins doing a solo interview with Simon Fudge, our good friend out in Vancouver. We had to do a bit of a late one here tonight, Ontario time, because it's not the center of the universe in Toronto, despite what we think. Well, we have to accommodate our Western friends. Simon, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. Obviously, our main talking point today with a Vancouver-based reporter, FIFA.com, of course, is where Simon works, is to talk a little bit about the, I don't know if we call it a derby or not, but the rivalry game certainly between TFC and Vancouver on the weekend. I can't recall, Simon, a flatter display by the Whitecaps in a game against TFC. It is usually a very spirited affair. It didn't really have that vibe to me on the weekend. Was I wrong to feel that?
No, I don't think so. I thought it was flat all around. I'll sum up the game for me. It was a match that was destined for a 0-0 draw. Although I do believe right up until the Brek Shea red card that there was probably certainly more than enough time from either one of the two sides to create a really good chance in the game. But it was probably going to come at the very end. It was interesting because I went through the highlights of the game yesterday, or the extended highlights, and I did think maybe the TFC carried the play a little bit more, generated probably more real genuine scoring chances that, let's be honest, they squandered. I think Nick Hagland will be kicking himself for not being on the score sheet in the first half. But it just had that feeling, particularly when both teams had a bit of a spell after the restart and then the second half. It was probably just going towards a 0-0, but the stupidity of Brek Shea to get himself sent off. I'm sorry, it cost the Whitecaps 3 points. Fair play to Toronto SC. I actually spent quite a good amount of time in the TFC dressing room after the game. Commended Michael Bradley and Drew Moore and the team for their application to basically grab the goose by the gander, as one would say, in the last 20 minutes, or particularly the last 15, and going in and claiming 3 points, which was there for the taking, and scoring 2 very good goals as a result. And you're right. I thought the Caps were a bit flat. I think the other thing that really stood out for me, 1 shot on target from 7 efforts, which was Russell Tybert's effort in the 61st minute. At home, not really good enough, but I do wonder a little bit in the back of my mind, and this also kind of went, I wonder if this particular matchup could have been played a little bit later in the year when both teams were a little bit more of a better oiled engine, because I think the feeling of it as a derby, and I was thinking of calling it the Trans-Canada Derby, kind of got lost in the sense that it came as early as it did in the season. Because I think if you look at the one when they had it last year, which was in May, and both teams had a bit more under their belts, proved to be a better game. And probably the reason for that was because they've been able to get themselves well into the swing of the season.
Yeah, I said actually in the show today that when this game, if you're going to play it this early, play it first, because you get up for the first game and you have a little bit more edge there. But when you get into that early grind of the season, it does sometimes not all the finishing and not all of the sharpness is there for sure. Let's get back to the Shea red card. Obviously, it's the turning point of the game. He gets it for dissent, the second yellow. The Whitecaps are going to throw their player under the bus, but what is your sense of how they're feeling about Mr. Shea right now, and in terms of his ability to stay disciplined and commit fully to the cause?
Well, I'm sure we'll get diplomatic answers from the club about it, but I don't think he did himself a lot of favors amongst the fan base here because that cost his decision to get himself sent off the way that he did, which is probably the most the most egregious way you can do so. I mean, it cost the team anyway being able to get at least a point in the game, potentially even 3. And he has to take responsibility for that and apologize to his teammates and the club. His arrival here, it makes it kind of interesting to me. Having listened to 1 or 2 interviews that he did through some local Whitecaps-oriented podcasts here, I get the feeling a little bit of a guy that wasn't terribly happy about the move, particularly because of his family situation. I think his wife is 6 months pregnant, and he hasn't had a chance because of all of the traveling and stuff that the club has been doing to really get settled into it. I mean, given time, he'll settle into being in Vancouver, especially once he has his family here. But I've initially not got the sense that he's settled all that well, and certainly in the way that he has not been able to get on the same page with his teammates. And it was quite evident even in the game on Saturday where, there were instances where, for example, his teammates were trying to play the ball on his feet and he had already turned to try and go upfield and wanted something played in behind. So there's still that disconnect that's there. It's probably not going to endear himself too much over a period of time. And by yesterday, I kind of wondered in the back of my mind after watching the Orlando highlights if we will be coming back and revisiting that trade and wondering if Orlando got the better end of it.
Of course, the Caps were coming off the 2-0 loss to Tigres in the CCL midweek. They're not going to make it as an excuse, but I'll give them a bit of an excuse. It is tough to follow up on that, to defend as hard as they did for as long as they did, and then immediately have to turn around, fly, further than Toronto did, probably ironically, or at least the same distance back to the game. I had to be tough on them. But how much do you think that did factor in?
It probably had a little bit of an impact. The biggest thing it's probably had is the fact that it's safe to say that we haven't been able to see Carl Robinson get towards a settled lineup because of certain injury issues that some players have had preseason. I mean, obviously not having Jordi Reyna to start the season is a big blow to them. I mean, the fact that he ended up breaking a bone in his foot in the last preseason game against Portland is as bad luck as you can ask for. Because I think he is a piece that was brought in to fill obviously that sort of number 10 issue that they still really have in their side. I think it was a factor because they've been trying to shuffle around to try and make sure that there was enough freshness in the side. So if you got a particular group that went out against Tigres that was out to do a particular job, you almost got the sense that the starting 11 on Saturday was the same. It wasn't at their most full strength, or players certainly at the peak of their powers as yet. Trying to get a job done, but something that was what you would almost call sufficient enough, as opposed to being at their strongest. And I think that's been the biggest issue right now with having to juggle the two competitions. The short amount of time and the distance was having to obviously go with 2 or 3 different groups. And when you haven't had a chance as you're into the start of the season to settle on what your strongest 11 looks like, it's a bit all over the place. And I think that's kind of where the Caps are at in one aspect at this point in time.
Let's go back to the Tigres game, though, in a general way. What are your thoughts on how they performed down there? I mean, 2-0's, that's a brave loss, but it's still a loss, and it still seems unlikely they'll be able to turn that around. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I would have felt differently if they'd only lost 1-0. I think, but then the strange thing for me is that the most immediate thing that I remember tweeting it right after the game was at 2-0. It actually, for the sake of entertainment, the second leg might be a better game because, in my opinion, there's nothing else that the Whitecaps can do other than to go after it in the second leg. And if they play on the front foot to attack this Tigres side, get them a little bit unsettled to their conditions in the turf and whatnot, which they'll be professional enough to come around and come good. But I think, within the game. But in those early stages, it'll be interesting to see if they need a bit of time to settle. They can get them on the front foot and come up with the first goal of the game, which they must score. Then we've got ourselves a very interesting game, and I think a lot of that will have been provided by the fact that that they're trailing by 2 as opposed to trailing by 1. If they were trailing by 1, it would still remain a bit cagey. And I still think the one thing is, as you guys, I think you and Kevin have spoke about late last week about how Club America went into Montreal in the final 2 years ago and played their game. Didn't sit back, took the game to them, particularly certainly won it in the second half, took advantage of a Nigel Rio-Coker playing it right back and badly exposing him. I think those are all the elements that we have to anticipate. But all in all, for a neutral, it actually might make for a better game to watch. So, but that's why they need to go on the front foot. It was interesting to me having a conversation with some other Whitecaps people who cover the team, who say, "Well, no, we should still be cautious." I said, "Well, what have Vancouver got to lose at this point? Why would you play cautious at 2-0 down? You need to get out there and get on the front foot and ask some questions of this Tigres side." And I think that's the way they have to approach it.
And just as a quick aside, Nigel Rio-Coker stood in that mix zone for 45 minutes after that game, patiently taking every question in a very professional manner. I gained a lot of respect for him that night. But nonetheless, let's move a little more global. The reaction in the fan base, fans are going to fan, and they're frustrated by the start that the Whitecaps have had in MLS play. There are some that are even starting to question, certainly question how the squad's been built, but there are some that are starting to even question Carl Robinson and whether or not he's the right person to move forward. I don't think he's necessarily in any danger right now, but if this does turn into a non-playoff season, might he be in danger at the end of the year?
Well, that's a very good question because he's contracted up until the end of 2020. So he's got this season plus another 3. So if the club decides to let him go without knowing what exit clauses they have potentially put in this deal, it'll be very expensive for them to let him go. And that's the real quandary that we've got here. I think there's every chance that certainly if things are slow and they don't have a very good year and the pressure mounts, especially because I'm sure the fan base are not only questioning him but historically as well, they've also been questioning the front office and all of the people upstairs, from Bob Lenarduzzi and others, the so-called football committee, and so forth, and probably even the ownership group. And those questions are just going to get louder and louder and louder. And the club has always given me a bit of a concern of living in a bit of a bubble of their own, kind of being deliberately oblivious to the real sentiment that's out there. And that always has given me a bit of a cause for concern because it kind of avoids, what the real sentiment is out there. Just to give you a particular interesting point on the game on Saturday, it did not reach its sellout threshold of just over 22,000. Their official number for that game was just over 20. So they weren't able to get, a sellout on what they call a sellout for that game. And I find that a little bit interesting that, what they lost and maybe a good amount of goodwill last season has spilled over here. And now they've had a slow start, which was one thing that I was a little concerned about, because I do remember the Montreal Impact 2 years ago was having a slow start in the league when they were on that run in the Champions League, that they're having a similar situation here. On April 1st, they've got a must-win game against LA because I know they go into the month of April, and then there's a run of 4 games away from home that they've got in their schedule fairly early on. So Carl will be under a bit of pressure, but it's actually, even for all of us right here, it'll be very difficult to know how to read that, because you have to balance the idea that they don't perform well and that he's potentially in trouble with the fact that he was given this massive contract extension. But then you have to boil it down and say to yourself, well, what exit clauses are there potentially in the deal that could allow for the club to maybe let him go and they pay him only a certain amount off that deal? Or does he get the full bore, and are they prepared to give him the full bore? Either way, if they let him go, let's say, and things have gone very slowly this season, and it happens in the summer, that's not going to look good on the club, because the first thing you have to turn around and ask of the club is, why would you put him on a deal that was effectively a 4-year contract extension, and halfway through the first season of that, cut him loose. That's actually one of the things you have to think about with this situation, if it is even one, or it could potentially be one. So it creates a bit of a quandary. But, I think that panic, as much as we could treat it as being panic, is underlined with a huge amount of frustration, because they endured a very, very tough year last year. It did not go according to plan based on what expectations were off the tail end of 2015, and it's been a slow start again. And I think it's safe to say the team doesn't have the type of balance in the setup right now to look competitive or look balanced, and it is all a bit of a concern right now. But for all of those things that I've mentioned, it gives you a sense of just how complex the situation is. I don't think it's black and white to think that he is under as much pressure as people think, especially when you have to remember in the back of your mind that he's on this huge contract as he is at the moment.
And certainly the Whitecaps are not a team or an organization that has seemed willing to just spend without thinking before, right? I mean, MLSE would just write a check and have it over with, but that's not quite the same thing out there. Let's go to the composition of the roster real quickly. Just from an outside perspective, it's sometimes hard to get a good handle on who exactly is most responsible for building the Whitecaps. Is it Carl Robinson? Is it Bobby and the group that puts these things together? Tell us a little bit about what your perspective is on who is most responsible for building the Whitecaps.
Well, I think Carl has. I mean, the club constantly, will say it till blue in their face that Carl makes these decisions at the end of the day. They were quite insistent in trying to hammer that home, as they were being questioned by myself and others last year on that. So the official line is never going to be any different. I think he probably does make the calls. The problem is he's doing it under quite financial restrictions and restraints, which means he's having to go out there and try and find value for money. So I think that's part of it. I think the DP situation does bring it back into the football committee aspect, ownership and so forth, and has to be cleared through several hoops. I think that is definitely true. And again, that brings in how much influence the front office and upstairs does actually have in the overall makeup of this team. Make no mistake, we're dealing with people here, particularly from an executive and front office point of view, that are hands-on. And as much as they have given the license to whomever's been the coach there to go and shape it and do it their way, the leash is fairly short, I would say. And so Carl, I think, without having really spoken about it, publicly, although you have probably seen it in a lot of his comments over the last couple of seasons about, this club works under a budget and works to those types of things. It's at that point when you hear that comment from him that someone should very quickly turn around and ask him, well, do you get frustrated by the fact that you're being restrained by that and those sort of things? Because I think he has a say, but he's doing it within a resource pool that's fairly limited to what some other clubs in this league have decided to do. And again, is the model working? I mean, this again, I come back to those two original questions. I think the last time I was on with you and Kevin, is MLS moved on to as a league from being able to make the model that the club is working on to work and work well? Yes or no? And more importantly, and this goes on to the club itself, not just Carl Robinson, but the front office, is the model that they're trying to work and make work from. Are they the ones, have they been successful at being able to make that model work? In other words, are they the right type of people trying to work within that kind of model to make that a success? I think that's something that you also have to hang. Those are one of the hanging questions over this club during the course of this season, in my opinion.
And that is a question that we will continue to ask ourselves, I think, moving forward for some time now, Simon. Let's end with a couple questions that are focused more on Canadian scene. And we'll start with, of course, the news that the CSA went out last week, hired a new manager. Just get your quick thoughts on the hire and what you think of their current direction.
I'll try and give you a bit of a timeline of my own reaction. It was a bit of a surprise to see the appointment come this early. It's quite evident that obviously Victor Montaliani was quite keen to get this done as one of the last pieces of work as CSA president before obviously he has to relinquish his reins with that and focus on being the president of CONCACAF, which I should just say as a digression, I think is a better fit for him as being CSA president, in my opinion, and I think CONCACAF are going to be well benefited as a whole, as a confederation, for his leadership going forward. It was a bit of a surprise. I certainly did not know Octavio Zambrano at all. Did quickly, obviously, look through his CV, but I was very impressed, particularly when I saw the official CSA introductory video of him speaking about and some other interviews as well, speaking about how this country has a lot of potential, and also trying to find and identify a Canadian style of play. Very interesting, the day after Canada's exit in World Cup qualifying in September, did an interview with Alan Arrington, who used to be Bobby Leonard's assistant with the 86ers and the Canadian national team back in the 1990s, and how he talked about, to me, the fact that this program needed to work around trying to get a Canadian identification of playing, instead of trying to think about how to play like other countries and teams do. And so it was encouraging to me that Zambrano spoke along those lines. I'm also quite pleased with the fact, and I don't know why it's taking them this long to do so, that he has been given the overseeing structure of the entire men's program from under 15 on up. I think we can basically see the explanation of why they let Tony Fonseca go, certainly shortly after the CONCACAF under-20s, which, let's face it, were an absolute debacle. I think Rob Gale should be moved on as a result of that. And Zambrano having the opportunity now to really structure all the way through, because we're getting dividends to a point with having set that up under John Herdman's guidance and overseeing on the women's side, and the big part of it is saying this is how we're going to play, and that's what we need to get towards is getting to a style and a play that where we want to go to. I'm still the advocate of this policy that I've been talking about time and again, and which is why it gets under my skin when we fail to qualify for these age group World Cups, is that part of what I think should be part of the whole restructuring of the men's national team program is that we now have a concerted policy where we should be funneling more of our resources into our under 17 and under 20 programs, so that over the next 10 years, we're making every one of those under 17 and under 20 World Cups. Our rivals in CONCACAF have benefited massively from being able to do that at the senior national level. And guess which 4 CONCACAF countries are going to South Korea in a few weeks' time? It's Costa Rica, it's Honduras, it's Mexico, it's the United States, particularly Costa Rica and Honduras. You know, they're now more than relevant on the international stage because they've been able to build a player pool foundation from being able to make those tournaments every 2 years. We need a bottom, in my opinion, I've talked about having a bottoms-up approach to this national team program. It's long-term in view, but it's absolutely necessary that we get them through and get them up, because if the players are playing in those tournaments and getting those experience of a FIFA tournament, one country, very similar structure, certain pressure on the line, they're going to be that much better equipped than when they're trying to qualify for an Olympics and then ultimately trying to qualify for the main World Cup. And if Zambrano has got an ability to be able to play something along those lines and help towards all of that, then finally we might be able to start moving in the right direction, because the fragmented structure that had been there even for the last 3 years is quite inexplicable to me. And I just don't know why it's taken, why it wasn't really put in place with the right type of appointment 3 years ago that oversaw the program 3 years ago, and that we were on this course as we were going through the process of trying to qualify for Russia 2018. I don't know why now we're starting to make these issues, but at least it is now a starting point in the right way. And I think Zambrano, it brings something very interesting to the table. It gives me the sense of knowing the league very well. We shouldn't overlook as well the fact that maybe he was a head coach in the old days of or MLS 1.0, but he has been involved in the world of MLS 2.0, 3.0, as being an assistant at Sporting Kansas City. So I think that's very valuable all around. So fairly encouraged, and certainly encouraged in the sense that I think he's a sharp, articulate guy with a particular idea of shaping a Canadian identity of playing and having the chance to be able to do that through the whole length and breadth of the program down from under 15 on up.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's now been 10 years since Canada played in a U20 World Cup. Of course, they hosted that one, not very well, and 12 years since they last qualified on their own accord. Simon, let's take it to end it with this. Tonight on Anthony Teixeira's show, Red Car Radio, Victor was on, and he said unequivocally that the Canadian Premier League was real and it was happening. That is the most definitive statement I've heard from anyone there. These rumblings are getting louder and louder and louder. The limit of Victor's time as the president of the CSA is fast approaching. You would think that if this has been his baby all along, that he may want to end with that as his final achievement as CSA president. It certainly would be a great legacy. Wondering what if anything you are hearing in Vancouver about this, and whether or not you feel that market would be able to support a Canadian Premier League team as well as the Whitecaps if that were to happen.
Well, it would be interesting. There have been one or two other people that I know that have put out certain ideas of exploration on that. The idea of a Vancouver 1886 type side playing out of Swangard as an alternative to the Whitecaps. Those that speak sort of from more that hardcore base would sort of say, yes, there is a desire for an alternative and so forth, but it's a bit difficult to say. I think it might initially be challenging in that regards. I think the other thing that's a bit challenging as well is the whole talk about Canadian Premier League is not something that's widely discussed amongst a lot of people that I know out here, because obviously we haven't had a lot of real tangible sort of news and information that's got people sort of saying that it's happening. So I think it's a little bit difficult to say if this would be a marketplace. Certainly, when it gets off the ground, that's going to be part of it. It may have a chance of doing so not long after it starts, but it's a little bit trickier to know at this point in time with that. Certainly because it's not necessarily something that's getting a lot of discussion amongst people that I know here, simply for the fact that it's not been on their radar, or they've just not been aware about it. And I'm speaking maybe more to people that are in the soccer community here that are sort of you would consider to be a casual Whitecaps fan or so forth, or actually when they think of watching soccer, it's mostly the European stuff, which is like a lot of the teammates I play with at my club, Westside FC. So I think it's a bit of a challenging one to say. Certainly not heard anything along the lines of a consortium or ownership group wanting to bring something in. It's just been floating out there like an idea. So it's all been a very interesting one for me, because if that's got a bit of mystery to it, my hometown Regina, and the fact that once again from that Hamilton Spectator newspaper report over the weekend suggesting that Regina is one of those core marketplaces, and talking to people that have got their ear to the ground there, and nothing has been heard by anybody there, including even local journalists who got their finger on the pulse of things, certainly with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It's just, again, another one of the great mysteries about what this project is all about and when it's going to happen. Obviously we know that it's coming. It may take a little bit of time for it to come. I certainly don't have an issue with that. If it's longer rather than sooner, to make sure everything is in place and work for it. I think as a starting block, in my opinion, it needs a minimum of 8 teams to really get it off the ground and make a go of it there. You could maybe do it with 6, but 8 for me, I think, is what they must try and put a target for as concrete as a starting block. And if they can't make a go of it for next year, certainly, try and aim as best you can, especially if there is the level of interest that's been out there, to try and do so by 2019.
Would it work on the island, do you think? Is that a better fit than the Lower Mainland? Would it work on the island, do you think? Would that be a better fit than the Lower Mainland?
It would be, for the size of the marketplace and the enthusiasm that there is for soccer there, Duane. The problem with that is that the ownership group that they're going to need to have there is going to have a lot of money in their pockets, particularly because the problem with having a team like that on the island is just the extra levels of expense with ferries and flights. I think the demise of the initial Victoria Highlanders under Alex Campbell Jr. Was a great lesson in how you may have got one owner of that team with quite a bit of money, but he did lose quite a bit of cash as a result. And it does require them to have a slightly more unique model because, like I say, I think their levels of expense, because of just where they're located and the fact that they're located on an island, require it to have quite a bit of money that they have to work with in order to make a good go of it, to what other teams would have to deal with in terms of yearly expenses. So I think it's possible, but it's about that marketplace and the people in the soccer community fully aware of just how unique of the cost levels that they have to deal with, which are higher than probably every other team in the country.
Fair enough, Simon. What do you got going at FIFA.com this week or in the near future that you'd like to promote before we say goodbye?
Well, obviously we're going into World Cup qualifying, so we'd encourage everyone to follow us on FIFA.com from Thursday all the way to the following Tuesday. Live blog service on all the games around the world. I think every confederation, with the exception of Africa, is in action. Some very interesting games going on across the regions, particularly in our part of the world, in CONCACAF and in South America. We're getting close to some of the first tournaments of the Air Beach Soccer World Cup coming up in Bahamas. That'll be followed by an Under-20 World Cup in South Korea, and then probably the big one of the year for us, which is the Confederations Cup in the summer in Russia.
Simon Fudge, FIFA.com. Thanks as always, Simon.
Thank you.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back to Soccer Today. Kevin Laramee, Duane should be joining us very shortly. Division 2 Wednesdays Brawl. First of all, thanks to Simon Fudge of FIFA.com for the interview that Duane recorded earlier this week. It is Division 2 Wednesdays, the beginning of the USL this week, and it's a big season, the biggest season in the USL history. Yes, that's in hyperbole, but it's the truth. A lot of drama, off-season tractations for a few teams in the league, especially the newcomers, Ottawa, Tampa Bay, that started the whole process. The Division 2 decision by the United States Soccer Federation, at least for the FC Montreal closing, Ottawa getting that USL sanctioning by CSA now. Montreal, the one Montreal used to have. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on the USL, and we will be doing so every Wednesdays this season. Now, a few subjects caught my attention, a few stories in the USL caught my attention. You know, it is quite impressive, the amount of new teams, the amount of stadiums and roster and everything that has been announced over the last few weeks. The one in Phoenix catches my attention, the Phoenix Rising. The pop-up stadium of some sort, that's what it's been dubbed, lack of a better term. I can agree. It's like a pop-up stadium. It's like a pop-up shop. It's where there was no stadium, now there is. And there is a lapse video that's out there somewhere, a time-lapse video with a special camera that you actually see it happen. It's always, I love those time-lapse cameras, time-lapse movies. But for Phoenix, I will keep an eye on that team just because of Alexander Regi, of course. Let's call the FC Montreal diaspora. Menetemgua signed in Cincinnati. There's other few players that signed in the USL, and it's kind of interesting to see how those players performed this year outside of Montreal. Some of them in a team that does have a partnership with a Major League Soccer team. Some of them don't, and you'll see a different type of play, a different type of maybe performance development. The infrastructure surrounding those teams are different than they were exposed to in Montreal. So some of them for the better, some of them for worse. So we'll see where that leads some of the teams in the USL. All right, so we'll get Duane here in a second. But for USL Wednesdays, I am going to keep an eye on Cincinnati, Phoenix, and a lot of great team roster. They performed well in their first few seasons. Two teams really catches my attention, and Duane is with us. Duane, how you doing?
Good. Not sure what happened with the computer there, but we're here now.
Exactly. I was talking about for Division 2 Wednesdays, USL starting this weekend. There's a pop-up stadium in Phoenix. It's quite interesting. They created a stadium out of thin air, basically, and there's that time-lapse movie out there that it's quite interesting to see.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Empire Stadium, the temporary Empire Stadium they built for the Whitecaps' first 2 seasons or 1 season, maybe just 1 season when they were renovating BC Place back in the day. So that is certainly something that's cost effective and a good idea. I mean, they're only going to last a couple of years, but you can put a new one up every year, and they work quite well. Even just directly recently last year, not last year now, 2 years now, for the Pan Am Games here in Toronto, they had a couple of those pop-up stadiums, including the one for the beach volleyball.
That was awesome. I saw I was next to BMO Field. That was awesome. I remember being at BMO Field and be able to see the games happen from the press box. Yeah,
no, exactly. And it worked quite well, and they were quite comfortable. And again, if you're looking at building it's hard to get stadiums built for D2 level teams. That's an option that might be out there that's much cheaper especially if you have an established infrastructure like this. So yeah, certainly that's an interesting and good way to go about things.
And just before we connected, I was mentioning the FC Montreal diaspora because that's how I'm going to dub it. The players emanating from Montreal now playing in different cities. You have Alessandro Regi with a second shot of having a professional career this time around with Phoenix. Other players like Menetemgua signed with Cincinnati. And so it'll be interesting to see how those players perform in the USL this year.
Yeah, and look, that's good for them that they're getting more opportunities. I'm still not entirely sure why Montreal scrapped having.
We'll eventually know everything that happened eventually, I guess.
Yeah, look, it's disappointing to me that they did, because obviously they were doing some good things in terms of producing players that were capable of playing at another level. And I'm not sure, and maybe I will, again, because of our technical issue here, I'm not sure whether you spoke to the idea that there's no FC Montreal in this Ottawa Fury partnership yet. But
I just mentioned that it'll be interesting to keep an eye on. We touched on it on Soccer Today a few times this offseason, the reasoning behind a cost-saving measure, a measure that the output and the performance compared to what they were putting in, now having Bologna more involved in the technical side, everything combined when they look at their own pyramid internally with information that we don't have. So that's where it's hard for us to take a judgment on the decision right now, because there is info we don't have, the books and everything, including on the business side. They decided it was best for them not to have FC Montreal on their pyramid.
Well, I can make the judgment on the soccer side, though.
Yes, on the soccer side, it's not the best decision on the soccer side, but it's one of the components of the decision, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, and maybe it was going to push Joey to bankruptcy. I don't know, but
I doubt it. I very, very much doubt that aspect, very, very much. But if you're looking at now Bologna FC and their academy and their potential, and maybe they felt apart. I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here, because I do feel it's a shame, and it's a shame that the opportunities of being a professional player, the opportunities of having that infrastructure, that environment with your team of your hometown, and that feeling, that belonging feeling, that sentiment of you're growing up you're living your dream in your city. It's something special, and unfortunately, at the top level of an academy, this is not available in Montreal now.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I will say, not so much to defend it from a soccer perspective, but to try and understand it from a soccer perspective, is that the Impact never really fully bought into the idea that it was a fully professional squad that they were putting forward there. They always approached it with a very developmental bent.
A U23, if not top of the academy setting, was the goal and the experiment with FC Montreal. 100%. Like it was outright said by the club. I remember writing an article in the first season of FC Montreal that was retweeted by the club, by the coach himself, Philippe Lafroy. It was about the goal of this project is development, and development is not quantified by wins, and it's not quantified by results. It's quantified by minutes of play in top tier professional league around the world. And you know what? Look at the Diaspora now. They didn't all find a club, no. But the majority of the players that didn't in North America, they found a place in Europe. They found a place in Göteborg. They found a place in other places in Norway, Sweden. And they're playing, if not at the top tier, on the second tier. But they're playing professionally soccer in the world. So, you know what? There was some result out of these 2 years of FC Montreal, come to think of it.
Yeah, which is why it's a shame that it's not going to continue. But to continue my point, it's that, that's fair and fine what they said, and it's right what they said. But when you get to the USL level, that's a professional league, and did they ever truly fit in there? I'm not sure. And maybe part of the thinking, and might come out later on the soccer side, on the technical side, is that they're a better fit for another league, another level. I don't know what that is.
The lack of the other level made for the dismantling of FC Montreal, made for the next few years, possibly. Who knows when the CPL comes? Who knows when the PLSQ is a little bit bigger, maybe fits more the need of Montreal? Who knows? Those could be options in the future. But with the timetable at hand right now, with the time scale at hand right now, they felt that it was better suited to keep the under U18, the PDL, and the other tournaments and U16, U14, U12 levels that they do have. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but different academy levels do still exist and are thriving and are performing well across the board. So you do still have that part of the academy with Montreal. It's just the U23 team, basically, that was dismantling for now because of a lack of either going into a league that fits their need and their level more accurately, or you have to fold for a few years. So the lack of opportunity as a team and in a league that maybe fits them more explain a bit as well why FC Montreal doesn't exist in 2017.
Yeah. I know this is D2 Wednesdays, not D3 Wednesdays, but yeah. I've never fully understood why the PLSQ wouldn't be an option for them.
It's a lot of different reasons why, especially at the beginning, though. It was more semi-pro, and it's just slowly in the next 2 years, I would say, realizing the potential it has in itself. At the beginning, it was more a semi-pro and older type of player league, and you still have that. The young player component that we do see in League One Ontario was not necessarily fully embraced by the PLSQ at the beginning. Slowly, we're seeing that turn because we've talked about this many times when on the show. Younger players, U18, that grew up in an academy and a better infrastructures, their ceiling is a lot higher than a little older player, semi-pro. So you actually have more benefit in the long run. So for a PLSQ setting, at the beginning, there was a lot of rivalry and competition, and Montreal were the few times they actually played games against them in exhibitions. It was always, we're trying to prove ourselves against the MLS team, and it was a hacking contest on the field, and it was not games that Montreal felt comfortable as a club, as an idea, like as a entity to take part of. Now things are changing, and who knows, maybe we have seen some closeness, some not necessarily talks, but there has been some contact now, and there's some partnerships with the Fédération de Soccer du Québec, which takes care of the PLSQ. And they just announced yesterday, the Impact, that they have a partnership now with the Soccer Association of the region of Quebec. So for elite players, if they want to join the Montreal Impact Academy and they are from that region, they can go through that soccer association to join the academy. So we're seeing partnership across the board. So I think it's only a question of time before you see either a type of branding associated with the Montreal Impact take some type of shape in the PLSQ, or outright just in FC Montreal or FC Montreal like Montreal Impact type of academy team in the PLSQ.
Yeah, look, I only compare it to here in Toronto, where the Toronto TFC Academy, which has now been rebranded as TFC3, has played in League One Ontario, where the original League One Ontario champions. That was a team that League One Ontario championship team from the first year, which I covered very closely. I think I was the primary media person on the ground for probably 75% of those games. That's, where my Moba Bully thing comes from, because I saw him up close and personal in that first year.
What happened to Moba Bully? It's like I haven't heard about him in a while.
He's still a professional player. He's just not going to get much time this year, I don't think. Look, I think that, it's worked well for them, but you're right. League One Ontario from the launch has always envisioned itself as a U23 league. In fact, they have rules that require U23 players, a certain amount of them playing, with a few sprinkled older players in, whereas the PLSQ always operated more like the Outlaw Canadian Soccer League, the sense, not in all senses, but in the sense that it's a semi-pro league with 28, 29-year-olds running around.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I think a 1 or 2 season older than League One Ontario, but it's just before the wave of development in the academy that we see now happen, right? It's about 7 years ago now, something like that. So it's just before what we see now. And the idea, and it had some trials and tribulation here in the PLSQ. Like you've seen team like AS Boisbriand came out. My alma mater, Boisbriand, that's where I used to play when I was a kid. So I could say that I'm actually an alumni of that club if they ever come back to PLSQ. But that's another thing for another day. When you're looking at the other team, the Gatineau appeared and disappeared, and the Ottawa Fury Academy appeared, disappeared. You had a lot of ups and downs with team. The idea, though, I still believe it's a fair idea if you actually play the game locally in your community, competitively as well. Every soccer association is best team. They all played against each other. Blainville against Boisbriand, Laval versus Montreal, Fabrose versus Delta versus, that's what you used to play here. So if you have like a PLSQ level team, I see the benefit. Example, Club Fabrose, which is a big club that includes Saint-Rose and Fabreville here in Laval. Example, there's a top team there and represents the whole soccer association basically as a top. That's where I see the benefits. You have example Delta versus Fabrose versus Boisbriand versus Hochelaga Maisonneuve versus Westmount versus, so you have that local kind of feeling to it, still at a high level with the community, and it could be the best players, U23, U20 even to that matter, of that community. That's where I see maybe the benefit and the idea in the long run. That could be very it's hyper local maybe, but it could have that interest.
Yeah, absolutely. We have fallen completely into a rabbit hole of nicheness here, but that's
but I'll just put another example. Brooklyn versus Queens, and in a semi-pro U18 level for our American listener, Yorkville versus Jane and Finch versus Oakville versus Niagara Falls. Those type of local level could be interesting for the Division 2 in the States and Division 3, Division 2 in Canada.
All right, to spin this back to D2 and continue with the TFC3 branding change, I think what that might represent from a TFC2 perspective is a slight change in philosophy from TFC, whereas we've seen TFC go much closer to the Impact model, to FC Montreal model, in the past and have struggled greatly. I do actually believe that we will see them field a more competitive team this year, more in line with what the Whitecaps 2 did last year, where they went to the Western Conference Final, and will bring several of those players back almost on a USL-focused, USL-only kind of perspective. So I think that that's a big part of that TFC3 rebrand, is that they now are going to focus much of more of their development and pure development needs through the League One Ontario team, which is the TFC3 team, which is, went to a big tournament in Italy and tied Uve. So this is not a poor team. And I think it's a testament to League One Ontario's strength that that they finish. They're not near the bottom, but they're kind of not near the top either anymore. They're kind of a mid-table team, for lack of a better way to put it, in League One Ontario. There's a lot of programs like Sigma and London and teams like that Vaughan, the champions, obviously. Vaughan's going to play Syracuse next month in a game that I'm very interested in. I hope there's a stream for that. I'd like to watch that. But at any rate, I think that tells you a little bit of what TFC's two slight philosophy difference is. They've also just, to continue with this kind of nicheness, they've also signed an agreement with KW United, which were the PDL champions a couple of years ago, to be their official PDL team so they could continue on at a PDL level. So the TFC's got a lot of different things going on that way to try and meet all of their development needs. I hope the Impact eventually finds something that replaces what they had with FC Montreal, even if it isn't at the USL level.
No, true. And go back to USL level here, Duane. Reno 1868. I'm interested to see what the biggest little city in the world does in the USL. I love Reno. Hopefully, I can get a chance to go back to Reno this year if I can find that cheap flight. Because hey, sometimes you do have cheap flights, and it's always a trip down memory lane, a trip down to 1990s when you go to Reno. It's quite surreal, and you have to experience this at least once in your life. And I have to go to Vegas, true, maybe once as well. But Reno now in the USL maybe gives me a reason. Reno, if you want to have me to the report, you can always fly me to Reno, and I will gladly go interview all of you. But Reno, I can't wait to see what happens in the biggest little city in the world.
Well, I knew that that's what you'd say. I in terms of teams coming in that I'm excited to see. Obviously, as a guy that was at the very first ever Ottawa Fury game, I'm curious to see how they make this transition. I'm also very curious to see whether they start to really take advantage of this Impact partnership. Now, I know a lot of their fans were very upset when they announced that, but to me, there's been very minimal sort of.
They're not even. I don't think the actual 5 player allotted spots will be used. That's how. I don't want to say thin the roster is, but I don't even see in the Montreal Impact roster now who could benefit from it. When the French players of the academy playing for Montreal now are either close to the 18 on the bench and close to having more playing minutes. But the rest are already out, so I don't see a lot of players. Maybe there's some I think that is over there. 18-year-olds of the Montreal Impact Academy will be those players using that 5 spot and not older reserve player of the first team.
Yeah, which the problem with that being is the Fury, if they are trying to operate as a competitive, quasi standalone team. I mean, they're not, but they are, Well, I guess they are a standalone team, and how we define them. They're not directly affiliated, but they do have that affiliation. If they're trying to operate in that way, they may not be very interested in an 18-year-old Impact kid, which was the fear of the fans moving in. So I am curious to see how the Fury do nonetheless. The other team. And
just to finish on the Fury, Duane, all the rumblings are indication right now it's going to be tough to watch the Fury on TV. So if you're in the Ottawa region, keep an eye on the next few days. It will be announced, and it's probably going to be as difficult as it was over the last few years to watch Ottawa Fury games.
But you can watch them on YouTube because all USL teams are on YouTube, right? So there is.
I'm not sure if it's the same this year, but I think it is. But a lot of teams now actually have some local TV rights. So we'll see where that changes the YouTube broadcasting if it does.
Yeah. My understanding is that will continue, but we'll hopefully that will, because that's something that's going to take up a lot of my late night.
And now in 2017, with all the gadget, the Chromecast of this world, if you don't know, now you can easily stream, and just with an HDMI cable, put a YouTube game on your big TV and it's HD and it works perfectly.
Oh yeah, Chromecast, $40. Go to Future Shop.
You can stream anything on your phone. Almost everything now has a Chromecast available, even your games. So if you don't have a Chromecast, you probably should get one.
Except for TSN and Sportsnet and their apps.
Well, yes, because they have their own apps, yeah.
Yeah, the idiots. But anyway.
Well, no, because they want to do it with their own stuff, right? And
do you want me to go on a 10-minute rant about Sportsnet now and how terrible it is?
And wait, Duane, have you seen the news yesterday? The Bell and Rogers, if you're a bar, TSN, all those sports channels won't be included now in the basic liquor license TV cable deal. You will have to pay over $120 a month for each and single individual TSN channel. So imagine that's $700 for TSN. Add another $700 per month for Sportsnet. So for all the cord cutters out there that were streaming their games, and when it's a big game, going to a bar to watch it, there's a lot of you out there. I should say I too, because I was with you until I actually needed to get cable back. But it's making difficult now for people to the TV industry. The big TV providers in Canada are milking it for everything before they actually change their ways.
Well, yeah, they're cutting off their nose to spite their face when they do that, but nonetheless, let's just move on from that.
Exactly. We've talked about this many times, Wayne. The media world, but especially the TV world, the sports and entertainment and television world as a whole, is in a transition stage, and you either take good decisions or bad decisions. You either trying to innovate or you're trying to catch up. And I don't need to spell it out loud, but we all know which part the TV world is in. They didn't innovate. The internet did.
You know what? The music industry went through this in the 90s, and they're coming out of it now, I think, because they finally figured out that they couldn't fight the inevitable, and the TV industry is going to need to figure the same thing out.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Anyway, back to soccer. Yeah, the other team that I'm interested in watching a great deal, and if I had to pick my preseason, I haven't fully gone into the full investigation yet, so this is with the giant caveat. But just off the top of my head, and a quick sort of survey of sort of the previews that are out there so far, and there's so many teams in USL that it's very difficult to have a great handle on all of them.
30, over 30. How much now? I've even lost count.
Yeah, and look, and it's a very regional league, and we understand that. We try our best to try and bring in experts from other parts that understand it more. But anyway, if I had to pick an East and a West champion, I am inclined to think that Tampa Bay might be able to come in an original first season and get to a finals again. I mean, the Red Bulls too are your defending champions right now. They're certainly, those MLS2 teams are certainly getting better and better, the ones in the States anyway. But I do like what Tampa Bay is going to do. They're going to want to sort of emulate what Orlando has done, emulate what Sacramento has done, to try and build their brand through winning and to build their brand through success and packing the stadium and things like that, to make them difficult to ignore when it comes to the MLS expansion time. And now with Miami off the table for the expansion for 2 years, for next year, I guess it is now, because the season has started, hasn't it? Tampa's really got to think that it has a good chance. So that's my pick in the East.
Agree.
Tampa Bay.
And add to that the hashtag MLS to St. Pete, and the ambitions of not just Tampa Bay, but all the clubs that did put a bid in January that are playing the USL this season still are having an opportunity to prove their bid. And it's kind of their audition again this year. So the FC Cincinnati, Sacramento, St. Louis, Tampa Bay, and so on and so forth. Those teams kind of have an ambition, an audition here once again, and need to prove themselves in the stands, on the pitch, in the books, the profit, the revenue, the expenses. Make sure you can manage that type of team, manage a roster. You have to prove what you can do, and that's at all levels. So this year, those teams will have a magnifying glass on them by Major League Soccer. So that will be fascinating to see if Cincinnati can replicate their off-the-pitch success. On the pitch, they had a lot of success, but off the pitch as well.
All right. And in the West, if I had to pick one, again, off the top of my head, this is not my official prediction because I have not read everything yet. But off the top of my head, I still like the Galaxy's, the Galaxy 2, Los Dos. I do like them. I think that they are going to break through and win a title in this league sooner rather than later because of the immense amount of rich academy talent that is in SoCal. So that would be my sort of pick of there. Although I also look for a bounce back season from Sacramento a little bit as well. So don't be surprised if you see them back in the final, but you should never be surprised about seeing them in the final.
That's a fair assessment. So USL starts this weekend. I'm really excited. And again, youtube.com for most of your game. Go to uslsoccer.com to have more information on all the games, your favorite team, the schedule, and you can follow a lot of great accounts on Twitter. One of our favorites at Kyle J. Kepner on Twitter. He does some work now with Phoenix. You have a lot of great Evan Ream as well. A lot of players, and you can just search for the USL on Twitter. Twitter is pretty much the billboard where everybody connects with the USL. That's where we met everyone. So you can go to Twitter and just look for your best USL coverage.
All right. Thanks to Simon for joining me a couple nights ago. Again, that interview was intended to run today. Quickly, before I say goodbye, I do want to say anyone listening to this, it's getting taped right now at 11 a.m., obviously, so it'll be out on the podcast format around noon. If you hear this in the next couple hours on Wednesday and are in the Toronto area and have some time off work or just some time to kill, the Football Factory, which is at Queen and Bathurst, a good little place down there, used to be a sponsor of It's Called Football back in the day. They will be hosting the Voyageurs today at 3:45 for the friendly against Scotland, which, of course, we will talk about along with previewing the U.S. and the rest of the Hex tomorrow on Soccer Today. But until that time, as always, Kevin, say goodbye.
Stay tuned to the Sports Podcast Network for brand new episodes of Hard Radio coming in tonight, Soccer Today tomorrow as well, 10 a.m. And until then, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee, and have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.